Disney launching its highly anticipated streaming
One
service.
thing that has majorly changed during the last decade is the diversification of people's consumption of media, with the rise of streaming services going from relatively niche products to, well, things that most people can easily recognise, and they've proven to be viable options to traditional forms of media such as cable or radio. But how has this changed our viewing? The rise of services like Netflix in the early 2010s was initially just another way to get content served to you, with largely older and less popular content being served to early adopters of the service. Since its inception, however, Netflix, among other streaming services, has taken on its own original content, which most of the time is distinct and unique from that of traditional consumption methods, such as cable or satellite television. One way in which this has changed is the advent of longer and more serialised programming content, being treated as a longer, continuous narrative. Examples include Stranger Things, Jack Ryan, even things like Hemlock Grove. This transition was noted by House of Cards writer Bill Kennedy, who noticed the fact that the longer runtimes allowed for directors to, quote-unquote, make editing choices that are the best thing artistically, not necessarily hewing towards a particular running time standard. This was something which was shown in the previously mentioned Hemlock Grove. Now, previously, horror media would feature a key scene at the end of the narrative, something like a werewolf or a monster transformation scene. This was to serve as a way for the audience to bring an end to the surmounting story and would allow for it to come to an organic end. Hemlock Grove changed this formula by giving the focus to certain story elements that could not necessarily be explored due to scheduling problems earlier. This would be trying to fit the show into a half-hour time slot, for example. This involved putting the transformation scene at the start of the series, in the second episode in fact, and afforded the show to use the scene to hook the viewers into watching a continuous narrative following the events after this transformation. This was described by director Eli Roth as a project that in its early stages got changed a lot because you started to look at it like a 13-hour movie, and the first 3 to 4 episodes were your first act. This method of storytelling works for some, but for others it just flat out doesn't work, and becomes very apparent when you look at shows that began their lives elsewhere and continue to live on newer platforms. When you look at shows like Arrested Development, a show that lasted 5 seasons, the divide in storytelling between its previous run on Fox and its acquisition from Netflix is stark.
Well, that's not a great sign.
Its last 2 seasons are some of the worst received in the show's run, and according to critics, it's because the show abandons its old crazy format and becomes more focused and character-driven, with each episode serving as a tile in a larger narrative mosaic. As much as it could seem like this is a rant on Netflix here, services like them are leading and changing the genre of modern media consumption. One way in which they're doing this is the extended greenlighting process that tends to occur within these systems. This relies on data that the services collect about their users, how long they spent watching content, their favourite actors, their favourite directors, and because of this, programming has become a science.
Are you using space-age algorithms to read my mind?
It's been allowed to be increasingly more diverse, with shows being given chances based on previous user interest. One show which fully demonstrates the success of this method is Love, Death, Robots. This is a show which was released in an anthology or self-contained format, something which is not necessarily commonly found on other platforms. However, because of data collection, because of the way that Netflix gathers its information about its users, they were able to commission the project, as well as attach big-name popular directors such as Tim Miller and David Fincher.
Oh man, this is so exciting!
This directly had influence over the content, as it immediately was conceived to be in a non-standard 15-minute runtime. This was half that of the comparable slot that television shows on cable or satellite would be given. See, traditional television doesn't work like this. Companies commission projects based on past success and what they know can make money. They don't do it based on what they know about the user. CW is a great example of this. The network hosts several superhero shows, all of which have similar or even interlinking storylines, and many writers are brought between projects. They commission these sort of shows because they know that they can provide an equal financial return in a worst case scenario. I mean, you only have to look at the cast of Stranger Things. That show was rejected 15 times before its eventual undertaking by Netflix by all the major networks. This was in turn because of its different style of storytelling and complex and interweaving plot. It followed different characters and jumped between character plot lines in order to tell the full overarching story, something which had not been undertaken in other previous shows. But one thing that has been apparent with the rise of these newer platforms is the way in which they've handled the issue of monetization. It's changed the way content has been made. Newer content services, like Netflix, among others, have offered advertisers less and less airtime for their products to be shown in dedicated ad breaks, if at all.
So we're very comfortable doing no ads.
Now, we all know how much of a disaster something like the Emoji Movie was, but this is a great example of what the modern interpretation of advertising on these platforms reflects. And if you're not sure of this, Amazon is literally building a way to purchase items as seen on screen with one click built into their Prime Video service. But here's the thing, we've been talking about two main competitors in the streaming space this whole time. However, there is one major player we've missed. See, this platform turns our previous points on its head. Disney Plus is different to other services as its monetization model relies on content being pushed out in a weekly release instead of the more commonly used binge model that others like Netflix have employed. While the catalogue currently, as of filming this, is quite scarce, this has changed how their original content is produced as it follows a more traditional route of storytelling. If we take one of their largest shows, The Mandalorian, again taken from a commercially successful pre-existing franchise such as Star Wars, something which they know will provide at least a financial benefit to the company. The episodic structure is different to that of something like Prime Video's The Boys. Episodes still fit into the 30 to 40 minute time slots that traditional TV would previously fill. And the storytelling is also altered compared to that of the Netflix shows. See, if we compare these two series, both episodes of the series initially start off the same, introducing characters, building information with minor story details. We all know this. However, the real differences start to show towards the end of the programme. See, The Mandalorian decides to end each episode on a dangling thread, trying to leave users wanting more, right through to its finale. This is similar to tropes employed with older series such as Breaking Bad, which would often employ the same method. This clearly benefits Disney as subscriptions are driven for a longer amount of time. However, it branches off from how other streaming content is made available and how it's produced. See, you can make a viable argument to say that a platform's commercial strategy ultimately has more impact on the product that is being produced than its platform of choice. Even branching out from video or cinema. Media outlets such as video games can follow both of these tropes too, taking the former self-contained anthology story approach through games such as Battlefield's War Stories. Or having a more drawn-out, complex plot, having elements such as prevalent cliffhangers to hook audiences onto the next phenomenon or next installment in the franchise, such as Heavy Rain or even The Last of Us. If we look at it, platforms have constantly evolved to give creators more and more control with media, whether that be from progressing from cinema to television, or from television to internet-hosted or digital engine-developed media. And while it's nice to think that these platforms may influence or change the product that is hosted on there, I think a more realistic sentiment is one that's driven by financial records.